All right, we're going to get started. We'll probably have more people fall in. I will tell you the reason you get to take this long trip to the basement is we are videotaping this session, which I'm very happy. I pushed hard to have a session like this here because I find that at a lot of our conferences we tend to talk about the larger cities. We tend to talk about the Seattles, the Bostons, the Washingtons. And I know that a lot of smaller places have more difficulties and more challenges to try and justify transit for whatever reason. The panel we have today on transit, TOD, livability in not so large cities. We did it, so can you. I hope you'll find very inspiring if you're dealing with some of those challenges. What you didn't find in your program is we do have HUD on our panel today. We will apologize for not having it in the program, but HUD had a little problem not having a budget this year, so they weren't sure they could commit to travel. And then there was something about a furlough, and poor Dwayne, and we had some difficulty, and we just didn't want to embarrass them by having them on the program, and it was looking very much like they wouldn't be here until, lo and behold, I think Friday or Saturday, I get a pop-up email saying, I could still be there if you're interested. So I said, great. Anyway, before we get started, I am supposed to announce that if you're wishing to earn ASLA continuing education credits for this session, complete the sign-in sheet in the back, just outside the room, as well as the ASLA form. I guess everybody's accreditation requires different kind of paperwork. In terms of your AICP, they're still available through your online reporting. You should find all the sessions there, the ones you've been to. Please make sure you take care of signing up and getting the credits for being here. We have a great panel. As I said, we did have a late agreement from HUD that they could be here today. We have Dwayne Marsh, who's a senior advisor to HUD's Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities. Before his work with HUD, he did policy work on advocacy, economic and social equity at foundations and nonprofits. He's most proud of his work with grantees and the garden that he and his wife started this year. So hopefully he'll share. If I would have known that sooner, I would ask him to bring some samples for us to try. Next, we're going to hear, and Dwayne will frame the presentation today with HUD's Livable Communities initiatives. And I think that really gives smaller cities an opportunity to think differently about how they can grow and how they can work towards transit and transit-oriented development in livable communities. Next, we're going to look at a regional approach. And we have Tom Guerin. You told me to pronounce it, now I can't. Guerin, who is the Assistant Director of the Mid-America Regional Council. He leads MARC's long-range planning and transit efforts, and he was the project manager on a 2-mile streetcar alternatives analysis and regional commuter rail in the Kansas City area. After that, we're going to hear from Gerald Varner, who is presently the Executive Director of the Central Arkansas Transit Authority. The Transit Authority provides streetcar and bus service in Little Rock. He's been there a whole 3 months. In fact, his staff volunteered him before he started. And he sent an email and said, how do I get on this? And I said, because you're just a special person, right? He's held numerous positions with the Denton County Transportation Authority, including the Chief Operating Officer. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Public Administration from the University of North Texas. And he was a member of the APTA 2009 leadership class and one of the 2011 top 40 under 40s named by Mass Transit magazine. And our final wrap-up is the first person who actually submitted this as a session and inspired me. I've been excited and talking to Larry for months on this. Larry Hopper is with the Oklahoma. He is a certified planner for 29 years, even though he only looks like he's 30, and is experienced in economic revitalization, urban planning, transportation planning, and both bus and rail planning. He's the planning manager for Metro Transit in Oklahoma City, and he managed the alternatives analysis leading the 2011 streetcar recommendations and has managed the 2013 Tiger II streetcar planning activities. He's also managed the region's 2005 fixed guideway transit plan that recommended commuter rail, downtown streetcar, a transit hub, BRT, and vastly more bus service. It all happened, right? We'll talk about that, right? Previously in his career, he was staff leader early in many projects. The Bricktown Mixed-Use District Revitalization, I've seen that. It's a very, very good place. The Citywide Trails Plan, Design Review in Commercial Districts, and more. He played a key role in OKC's first TIF district and raised the match to start the Bikes on Bus program. He has many interests, including the alma mater of his planning master's degree at the University of Oklahoma. Going to pass it on and I've got low tech here. Okay. And let Wayne get started.
So do I need to go up there or do I stay?
It might, well,
I can go
up to you.
Oh.
Wherever you're comfortable.
Well, I'll stay with you guys.
And I
If you
probably
want.
need to wake up my computer.
It's up there, good. Yeah, you'd love to be able to see it. Yeah.
You go in here. Okay.
Great, thanks a lot. I'll admit I was a little hesitant when I came downstairs and saw the cameras until I was promised that when they put this on the web, they'll let James Earl Jones do my voiceover. So I'm totally down now for this. I am not your father. So, I mentioned the garden just because we have to remind ourselves we're not just workers, we're human, but it's actually, I think, a working metaphor for the kind of work you guys are doing in communities. You put it in. I hadn't done a garden before, and we planted it in the spring. We got little seedlings. We were all excited, and then the work really started for weeks and weeks. And I was like, when is this stuff going to sprout and take root? And now we're actually eating out of the garden. I still think it's a highly subsidized garden. I don't know that we've saved any money in the process, but the joy we get from doing this, and, going in the back and getting some kale or some peppers, is really a good thing. So there's a lot of parallels here. I'm going to actually run you, and I will be moving at a brisk pace because I want to leave some time for the real presenters to share, and also for a good dialogue. But I just want to think about some of the elements of what's made this work amazing for us as an office, and it's about nuance, it's about listening, learning, adjusting, and partnering. And I think those elements have helped us as an office try to be a responsive program. So I'm going to give you a little context. I think a lot of folks now know about this program, but I'll run through that. I'll talk about our grantees, how we build capacity, and then what we think will happen next. So our secretary from the beginning of his administration has had a frame about sustainable development, by whatever name you want to call it. And I think this quote from him basically says it's about how we look at long-range positive impacts for all people in our communities. We ultimately look at the intersection of economic, environmental, and social impacts. We try to think about how to use resources efficiently. And, we want our grandchildren to be talking about the good decisions we made in our communities, and a meaningful dialogue that emerged from that. So as it turned out, as a cabinet member, he was not alone. There's now something in the lore of federal government about a meeting that happened that launched the Sustainable Communities Partnership. And the theory goes that HUD, EPA, and DOT were about to do their presentations on the budget in 2009, and they all got together and said, we should do a joint presentation. And the alignment was so perfect that they didn't even have to wordsmith before they went in with their main talking points. Now, I wasn't there, and I've been in some meetings since. I don't know if that's completely true, but ultimately, the 6 principles that they raised at that briefing have stood as the livability principles. And when you look at those, provide more transportation choices, equitable, affordable housing, looking at enhancing economic competitiveness, valuing local communities and neighborhoods, coordinating policies and leveraging investment. They're fairly common sense, but they're fairly fundamental to the kinds of outcomes you want to see in our communities. And we recognized as the 3 agencies that had the biggest impact collectively on the built environment, we need to have alignment in order to do that better. And, the 3 agencies are the official partnership. I'm always, pleasantly obligated to say USDA is a quiet 4th partner with us. They've come along for the ride. We haven't really altered the MOUs, but they work with us in partnership very closely. And other agencies have stepped forward. And the administration holds this partnership up as a model of what it likes to see in federal collaboration. So our part as HUD was really to look at the long-range planning. DOT brought the money and the kind of momentum around actual transportation investments. EPA had the human power and some of the thinking and capacity building expertise. We wanted to really, as the secretary liked to say, put the UD back in HUD. But even as I like that frame, I think it doesn't serve the full meaning of what he gets at in terms of really thinking about community development at all scales, and urban and metropolitan areas, the relationship to rural places also being very important. So our office has 2 units that work on this. One looks at housing, energy efficiency, green building kinds of things. The other unit, which I work with and lead the grant program on, looks at the built scale, the regional environment, communities and corridors, and how do we actually plan more effectively for those. So ultimately, our goal is to really to bring inclusive participation in meaningful ways, to look at being interdisciplinary, creating interdependence in communities within regions, and then also innovation and really being an innovation center in the building and in the field. I often say the grant program is a centerpiece of our work, but it's not our mission. Our mission is to elevate the practice of planning in communities around the country, and we also try to build the capacity of those who are doing that work. So who are the grantees? Where are they? In some ways, we have these 2 programs that are, this is a very P-emphasized microphone. We have I'll just leave off the P's. We have a set of programs that are very innovative. And, but there are 2 main programs. We've put $250 million into them at this point. And beyond our programs, we also look at a number of other efforts at HUD that we think are aligned. And you see the list here. And it's really, they're more place-based initiatives coming out of our work at HUD. And so we're trying to think about how those synergize as well. But each of those programs does do its own work in communities as well. So the Regional Planning Grant Program has now put about $170 million into communities all over the country, and really looks at regional scale. It required, and this was, I think, fundamental game changer, that representatives from regional governments, local governments, and nonprofit partners who represented the community and could bring that perspective would work together to form consortia to do these long-term outcomes around economic competitiveness and revitalization, looking at social equity and inclusion, looking at energy use, climate change, and also housing and transportation investments. Really, how will your world look over the next 2 to 3 decades, and how do you make sure everyone has a meaningful voice in doing that? The Community Challenge Grant Program takes it's a little bit of a smaller scale. It could be as small as a neighborhood, it could be a transportation corridor, it could be a municipality. We have all 3 types. Local jurisdictions taking the lead, but with those other partners engaged, to think about neighborhood plans, corridor plans, master planning issues, really trying to promote mixed-use development across communities. And this is where we really have, as you'll see, managed to go even deeper into some not-so-large cities. So the answer to where we work is everywhere, 49 states and the District of Columbia. And should we get another round of funding, we will hopefully get that 50th state in there. It's Alaska, so you don't have to search the map. What one thing we learned is, we did this the first time around, there was 4.5 times the demand of funding for what we had for the regional grant program, and 12.5 times the demand for the challenge grant program. And we said, wow, there's a lot of demand out there. But next time around, we thought it would go down because we actually served some communities. The demand stayed constant. And this is a voluntary program, and I think that's lost on some of the people who like to critique doing work around sustainable development. These are communities who are stepping forward saying, we want to do this, and they really do want to be engaged. More than 145 million Americans live in places that have these. This is a program at national scale with a modest amount of money, $250 million thus far. And but you'll notice that some of those geographies are quite large and in not your normal expected places, and we'll talk about that a little bit. As you can see, the distribution of the grants by region is fairly balanced. As a person who lives on the West Coast, I still say we don't get the play we deserve out west, but it's a better than average distribution of grants, and it spreads across all the time zones. The leverage that we've gotten from the grants has been significant. Now, we did these grants at the heart of the downturn, and so we went out and listened in listening sessions before we did the grant program, and one of the things people said to us was, look, we know you guys always want this one-to-one match, and we just don't have the money to come to the table with this. We can't even apply if that's a requirement. So we adjusted the match for the program. I think it was 15% for the Challenge Grant Program and 20% for the Regional Planning Grant Program. And then people came in and brought one-to-one match, ultimately. I mean, some people brought more than that. Some barely made it in because they really were struggling. But ultimately, we're seeing people make the commitment of in-kind time, of philanthropic resources, of private capital investment to be able to do this work. So it's very encouraging. You'll see in this chart, this is for the regional grant program, and I highlighted in red the small, actually, this is regional? Yes. So this is, you'll see in red the grants that were given to smaller communities, or not the largest communities. When we first got the allocation from Congress, they gave us a $500,000 bar and said, put some below that and put some above it. We went out and listened, and we heard very clearly that wasn't really a nuanced enough cut, and so we made a third cut for even smaller communities of the regional and challenge grants. And a lot of our grants, 40%, you can see here, and across the 2 years, on the regional side, went to those smaller places or not so large places, to stay with the frame of the session. I presume this PowerPoint will be available so you can actually read these things later. The Challenge Grant Program, we did even better, I think, in terms of 45% going to communities of under 100,000, and then a good number going to communities under 50,000. Now, it's not the most nuanced touch into smaller places, but it wasn't designed that way. We had to again listen and nuance to get to the reach down, and then once we had those partners in the mix, had to figure out how to work with them. We have partners at all scales. City of Phoenix is doing a wonderful program, and I think they may have presented here about some of the work they're doing around a transportation corridor that runs through their 3 largest cities, and using creative connections, looking at health impact assessments. We go to large scale. I know this is a not so large session, but we do at the larger scale, 9-county Bay Area, San Francisco. They're using their planning money to build on a state-mandated sustainable communities plan to really look at issues of workforce and inclusion and low-income workers being a part of the regional future. And so, again, that engagement, participation being very important. More the scale we're talking about here, the city of Des Moines, I think they have one of the best names for a plan, the Tomorrow Plan, which they are now working on and coming to conclusion. I should mention that for the first cohort of grantees, they are now actually wrapping up over the next 3 to 6 months. And so we're starting to see finished plans, people moving to the questions of implementation. And then in Greenville, also doing some really interesting work. They actually planted an educator in the schools to work on planning issues so that maybe people's eyes won't glaze over quite as much when you mention planning terms in high school and college, and they're starting to hear about it in elementary school. Community involvement, definitely, community involvement is still an important element, a significant element of the work. We really prioritize in our office tools, voices, and really capacities for people to be able to stay in these processes, because we know they're long and arduous, and you have to be able to equip them to be a part of that conversation. Just a couple of examples of places where we've seen already outcomes, again, at multiple scales, from, job creation to, looking at transportation leverage, and then also even just complete transformation of, long-range planning and visioning at Thunder Valley, which is the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, consistently one of the 10 poorest counties in the country, now with a roadmap for how to move out of that and attracting investors to do that work. We also support elements around economic development, disaster planning. These things have all emerged as we've started to build partners in the federal government and worked on the ground with places. And so it's, again, this being responsive to the demand that you uncover as you go forward. So in terms of building the capacity, the reasons we build it, because the forces that you guys face are formidable. Change is threatening. And with apologies to planners in the room, we're not always the best communicators about the things that we're talking about. So finding ways to frame the work differently that people can actually engage is important. No shock here to you guys, fiscal crisis at all levels of government going on. And so how do we actually wrestle with that reality? It's kind of hard to talk about planning and investment when there's no money to even keep staff on board. The long time horizons, and then the complexity of this work is essential. We work with all of our grantees in a learning network that is, it's a buy-invite network, but if you're a partner in that community or region, you can participate in that, and so they can share candid challenges they're facing, and they're a set of capacity builders who work with them directly on some of the issues around implementation or infrastructure or looking at social equity issues, or just a range of things that have come out of this, and these capacity builders work with them. What happens next? as I mentioned, we're really trying to get to clarity on how you do implementation. How do you complete your grant requirements and finish your plan, but also how do you build governance structures that will let you keep moving forward on this work so that, a unique structure came together to talk about it for 2.5 or 3 years, but how does that translate into the actual implementation phase? And then leveraging community partners to be a part of that conversation as well. The federal partnership has learned a ton in this process, and so we have a laundry list of things we want to make sure that we do, aligning of plans, looking at local issues, making those partnerships up and down the chain from federal to local to state, making sure that we use our convening power to build new relationships. There are a lot of responsibilities we have to be good partners going forward. But ultimately, we know the end game is catalyzing investment in communities and thinking about the ways in which you can make those opportunities clear, make the pathways to make those investments really easy to navigate, and then actually have public, private, and philanthropic dollars that can go into those and then tie to the regional economic drivers that are long-term beneficiaries. We will try to share and learn with this network and beyond as we go forward. We have a club, if you will, of 143 grantees, but there's a larger club of 3,000 counties and cities and towns in the country who could benefit from this kind of work if they choose. So we want to make sure that we share those lessons in technology. And then lastly, just a few reflections for not so large cities that we've come across. And this is both rural and mid-size. It's kind of a potpourri of lessons here. It's kind of hard to see from where I am. So the smaller communities have untapped assets, and we recognize that as the federal government, and we need to see about ways we can help to tap those assets. We know that these plans have to be locally driven, and that's particularly important in some of the mid-sized or smaller communities where interdependence across small communities may be more important than just strictly thinking about a straight driving regional plan, and so we have to balance those things. We know that people can invest in place in rural communities and small towns. We understand that vital community conversations can be created sometimes at better scale in small and mid-sized cities than they can in large metro regions. And so we think that done properly, regional planning can work in those places. We have to build capacity at the local level for people to engage, as I mentioned before. And take advantage of the political environment. I think that sometimes there is a little more clarity around the politics of change in small and mid-sized cities that is an advantage you have over some of the larger metro regions, and that's really an asset to be leveraged. Focusing on the possible, but building with an eye to implementation, trying to encourage those partnerships that are really essential, and then really for smaller communities, it often gets into our tribal partners, and you have to recognize the distinct characteristics and commonalities in tribal communities. In some of our regions, the tribal places, have sovereignty issues that are quite different, but their end game and goals are the same. And so how do we navigate that duality? And then it never hurts to bring the money. So I think there are some resources available if you'd like to tap into those. As I mentioned, I think this will be shared, but with that, I'll turn over and I cede my extra 30 seconds to the next presenter.
All right. Thank you very much, Frank. I have heard that this will be, oops, I actually have you set up right. This ought to be available tomorrow, is what I'm told, the webcast. So I'm going to start with a regional approach in an area of the country that most people tend to just not think about, or an afterthought. These three gentlemen are going to give you some real hard thoughts of why you really want to come back and visit this area. I want you to listen carefully as they talk about their challenges. Think about how it relates to what you're trying to do. And at the end, we're going to have, they were all adamant they wanted a lot of time to have questions and answers. Please give them your tough questions, and they'll share with you very candidly what they've been doing. Go for it, Tom.
Thank you, and thanks to Wayne. We are putting HUD Sustainable Communities funds to work in Kansas City, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here in Seattle and tell our story. As was mentioned, from time to time, we are thought about as flyover country, and there's a little bit of a sensitivity about that for maybe some of us from the Midwest. I'm having a great time here, though. How many of you were at the session last night, the Slam, the Pichacucha Slam? That was a lot of fun. It was a great environment. All with the exception of the comment from our friend at Sound Transit, right, about the big wide open spaces that are problematic in the middle of the country. So no, even his comments were enjoyable. So part of our job here is to dispel some of the myth about the Midwest and about Kansas City and Oklahoma City and Little Rock is flyover country, and we'll try to do that. I'm going to talk specifically about why this issue matters to Kansas City, a little bit about our plan, how and why we think we're really positioned to succeed now, and now is the time, a little bit about initial outcomes, and lastly, challenges and next steps. But before I do that, I did feel kind of obligated, and part of this is my personal sensitivity to this premise. And so thanks to Google, Google's great. I'm looking at the definition of flyover country. Clearly there's two perspectives to this issue. You have the coastal perspective, which was reflected in the comments last night in this case, this is from the New Yorker back in 1976, and the view of New York was New York and everything else. Even Seattle was flyover country to the Pacific in 1976. But you also have this other definition, and maybe this is a perspective of more of a Midwestern mentality. This is brought to us by the Urban Dictionary, and I'll just go ahead and read it. A pejorative term used by residents of either coast to refer to all U.S. states that do not border an ocean, particularly those in the Midwest. And it goes on to say a very brief conversation that may in fact take place from a coaster that may go like this. Where are you from? A Midwestern says, from Chicago. Where the hell is that? Is it a foreign country or something? No, it's in the U.S. What state? Probably some lame state like East Dakota or Toronto or Mount Rushmore. Illinois, actually, the Midwesterner says. And the coastal resident says, loser. So this, again, just two representations of different perspectives on this issue, and we'll see what we can do to combat it. But Kansas City, more specifically, is in the heart of the country. It's heart of America, and we're proud of that. And we are, in fact, on the border of two very rural states, large states. We're made up of 2 million residents. We've got in our jurisdiction 9 counties in over 120 cities. So 2 million residents, 9 counties, 2 states. Not exactly necessarily a fully rural place, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Our role here, why am I talking to you as a representative of a metropolitan planning organization? It really is because from a regional perspective this matters, and we form strong partnerships and are helping the city. We have Sherry McIntyre with the City of Kansas City and our Dick Gerald with the Area Transportation Authority in the audience, kind of reflecting the partnership that we're moving forward with on helping to make this a reality. And importantly, back to Dwayne's comments, our region for a number of years have been trying to lay the foundation for a more sustainable, livable future, that it's not just about transit, it's about this bigger question about how do we prepare our region for success long term. But that's acknowledging that transit really does and is perhaps one of the most single impactful strategies that we can collectively advance to help get us there. So why does this matter to Kansas City? And this is a snapshot of our growth pattern over the last decade, where you see a hollowing out of the urban core, continued growth on the fringe. This is the sprawling pattern that, in fact, was very emblematic of even the Denvers and the Minneapolises 2 and 3 decades ago. And the good news here is, for the first time in 30 years, we have growth in the center city, in that small little blue dot. And so now our task is to grow that blue dot outward and stem the loss in the rest of the community. And so here we have historic population decline, continued movement of jobs to the fringe in areas not served particularly well by transit. We have shifting demographics of aging populations, of younger folks who are desiring a different sort of environment and who are desiring alternatives to the single passenger automobile. We have a desire as a region to be competitive with all of you in Seattle and New York and the coastal cities, and so we acknowledge that we've got to respond to and prepare for that demographic shift and be competitive not only regionally but nationally and globally. And we've had 30 years of failed attempts at trying to leverage transit investments to help address this issue. And now is the time, and we'll tell you a little bit about why. And most importantly, from a regional perspective, that a strong core equals a strong region. We know we can't be successful as a region on either side of the state line if our urban core isn't healthy and vibrant and all that it can possibly be. So our plan, I won't go into a lot of detail. I'm going to focus more on the streetcar element of that because that, frankly, is the game changer. But we're acknowledging that it's one piece, and we've got efforts that the ATA is advancing on improved bus services. We are working with the county on efforts to look at commuter rail, acknowledging we have to connect our suburban communities. That will continue to grow to our urban core to maximize that energy and help reinforce downtown. And we have needs that are beyond transit, obviously paratransit service, special transportation, but bike, ped, and these broader issues of livable communities. So our streetcar project, it's about 2 miles long. This is the map. It's going to serve as an urban circulator to connect our amenities within our downtown, from our historic market to a new grocery store, to a historic Union Station, to a new entertainment arena, all together with rapid modern day service with cutting edge technology. And the city is on a warpath to get this project done as quickly as they possibly can, and we have to give them a lot of credit. Mark led the AA in partnership with the city and completed that study in just over 6 months' time. It was adopted by the MPO in early 2012, and we've got a fully funded project that has completed NEPA and is moving towards construction late this year, early next year, with a date of revenue operations scheduled for 2015. And it's all based on the premise that this is the catalyst and the start of something greater. And in fact, the city, and we're working again through the same partnership on looking at already 8 potential corridors for extension of this line into adjacent neighborhoods and employment centers, and the relationship of this to, again, downtown bus service and potential commuter service that would connect in and feed this system over time. So how and why are we positioned to succeed? Well, let's be honest, these faces don't mean anything to most of you in the room, but we can draft great plans, but at the end of the day, if we don't have elected leadership that is actually willing to do what needs to be done to make this stuff happen, it doesn't happen. A great plan's a great plan unless we've got the folks in place to actually move. And for the first time in our history, we have those pieces in place, and we have great champions and leaders who are kind of fighting the good fight and doing what needs to be done to actually make this happen. We're also a city of great bones, and we talk about flyover country, and I think folks tend to view us as the suburban kind of element of what our region consists of, but we're a lot more than that. And in fact, we have streets that look like this, that are great fundamental bones and frankly are as good of transit environments potentially as any place that you would find in the country. And that makes sense because we were born a streetcar town. We had over 200 miles of streetcars in the early 1900s, one of the biggest streetcar systems in the nation, and our urban fabric and our urban core was built around this sort of travel and this sort of technology specifically. So it only makes sense that thinking about reintroducing it into areas where frankly our environment was built around it are positioned to succeed. So I want to touch briefly on the planning and zoning component of this, because the city really also needs to get a lot of credit, because they've quickly realized that it's not just about the transit project, it's not just about the rails, but it's about that there are other things that need to happen. And so eliminating parking requirements in downtown, allowing higher densities by right within the downtown development district, initiating specific TOD planning efforts to try to prepare and help the development community move forward, including assessments on surface parking lots to try to encourage higher and better uses. Again, these are all in a very conservative sort of environment, non-traditional things that maybe many of you have been doing for a long time, but was really new to us, and a sign that the city, elected leadership and staff got it, that the transit was a piece, but if you want to fully capitalize on that investment, you have to do more. And we're working on, again, the regional planning sustainable places work to support and reinforce. There also is this opportunity to build on critical investments and a critical mass of amenities that our city is already blessed to have. And so we've got a downtown market and a $400 million performing arts center and a new arena and a new entertainment district, all not connected within our urban core. And so what a great opportunity to connect it seamlessly with a modern transit system. We have local advocates and partnerships. I mentioned the organizational partners led by the city and the ATA and the county and the MPO, but we also have strong grassroots advocacy. They were also represented here. David Johnson was one of the leaders of that effort, helping to rally the community and to organize the community to actually see this through. And so some of our initial outcomes, this is where it really starts to get exciting. We're not even constructing the rail project yet, but we are seeing real impacts within the downtown and the Transportation Development District. Here's 2 blurbs from the Kansas City Star, our local newspaper. One that was in early October that cites 1,500 new residential units within this general vicinity that are coming online. And the other that cites a new hotel being built without incentives directly on the streetcar line, which is the first built in downtown since 1985 in a period of economic depression. In fact, there was just another one today or yesterday with another developer who's converting a surface parking lot to a 5-story mixed-use building, who said specifically that wouldn't have happened without the transit investment that's taking place. And here's a map of those investments and many more that we're seeing to pop up for a project that isn't expected to be operational until 2015. So we're excited about it. Our community is excited about it. We have new partnerships that are forming, and not just the partners that I mentioned, but as we look at what the ATA, our transit authority, is doing with partnering with the university to get students better connected to the bus services and transit services. The benefits are amazing, and we are well positioned. And again, we're well positioned to utilize this opportunity as a catalyst for improved regional services beyond just the downtown. So there are challenges. It's not all rosy. We acknowledge that, and I'll leave you with these. Obviously, funding our vision and meeting public expectations. We're raising expectations, and that's a great thing because our community believes that it's an if, not that it's a when. That it's a when, not an if, that this is going to happen. Whereas in the past, 7 failed citywide efforts to try to get this done. That wasn't always the case. There was a lot of skepticism, and that skepticism is past, but now there are real expectations. And so how do we respond to those? On the commuter side, obviously railroads are challenging. You all know that. And how do we fund the support of this system financially beyond the city of Kansas City, which I won't get into detail, but is bearing the brunt of these costs today. And then, lastly, next steps. The ATA is leading a realignment and reassessment of our bus service to support and integrate and build off this downtown project. We've got the extension work that's ongoing and will advance. And then we've got discussions about countywide propositions that could help support and build on this, as well as supportive bus services, connecting these things together and moving them forward in an implementable sort of fashion. So back to flyover country. Here's a snapshot of flyover country from Kansas City's perspective. What a great picture, right? And oh no, I missed the animation didn't work. There it is. Corny clip art animation. And flyover not so fast. So again, we are excited about what's happening in Kansas City, and we hope you are too. So with that, thank you very much. Yeah. Hey, it's that amazing. It's that amazing. Thank you.
These guys remind me of the little train that could, I think I can. They're just really are. Good. Let's go on to our next one then. There we go. Let's make sure I've got this out of your way. There's your thing. On to Little Rock.
Yep, and since my staff was so gracious to sign me up for this before I was brought on board, I'll gladly take credit for the 10 years of hard work that the River Rail took. Basically, this presentation is based on an economic study that was performed by our very large planning staff of one, Matthew Long. So he gets all the credit. He did a tremendous job working with the developers in the area. While CATA staff and the board of directors and the local elected officials all agree that the River Rail has been a tremendous success. In an area like Little Rock, or our region, we serve five cities in central Arkansas. We still have to continue putting out the message that there's a major benefit in transit. We've got to continue to grow transit in our region. So really this is going to kind of talk about sort of the bang for the buck that central Arkansas has received because of the River Rail project. And River Rail, I think, has been talked about at Revolution before, but just to give you a quick background, the streetcar project was a major component of a downtown revitalization effort in Little Rock and in North Little Rock that started back in 1995. And that's that's the time when the planning started to revitalize downtown. That's when we talked about, Tom talked earlier about the elected officials and having that very strong visionary leadership. That absolutely was the case here. There were 3 individuals, the county judge for Pulaski County, the mayor of North Little Rock, and the mayor of Little Rock, all actually kind of coming to Revolution, traveling, seeing the Portland streetcar development, that sort of thing, really invigorated them and got them fired up to begin this revitalization and centered around the streetcar. Earmarks started rolling in. They've got about, with the local match, the first line was started in 2004 for a cost of $20 million. And we'll kind of get into some of the break out more of the funds and just the bang for the buck that the region has received. The second The extension was completed in 2007 and took service out to the William Jefferson Clinton Library development that is just east of downtown Little Rock. So we've got a total system of 3.4 miles. We've got 5 historic streetcars at a total cost of $30 million. You can kind of see, I wanted to show you some pictures of the streetcar sort of in its element. It operates mostly in downtown Little Rock and downtown North Little Rock. It really connects both sides of their sister cities on either side of the Arkansas River, and so you can sort of see it's operating in downtown. The bottom right picture is the trolley crossing the bridge over the river, connecting the two downtown areas. We're definitely a partner in downtown events. The trolley is a major generator for tourists, for folks from all around the state, really, whenever there's a major event in Little Rock. Again, Little Rock's the capital of Arkansas. It's really the arts and entertainment center for really the entire state. And then it was funny to me that really the biggest, and it's almost an annual event, the biggest ridership day for the trolley is the Jimmy Buffett concert. He's a major figure in Central Arkansas, I've come to find out. We also participate in lots of other marketing events. Again, we're trying to get the community to embrace the trolley, to continue obviously increasing ridership, but to get them to continue to embrace. And obviously we want to, we have an annual event with Mr. and Mrs. Claus, and that's another great day for the trolley. This is a map of the alignment. You see North Little Rock on obviously the north side of the river and downtown Little Rock on the southern side. We put together a small, again, just that we're continuing to make sure that the river rail is seen in a positive light in our region. And so, again, this is an output of the study that really shows how much we've gained based on a very small investment. Again, the Little Rock started in operation in 2004, total cost of $30 million, 3.4 track miles, $8.8 million a mile, which nowadays, I mean, you're lucky if you can relocate your utilities for $8.8 million a mile. And so clearly we have gotten a lot of bang for our buck. The big question that we keep getting asked and is what have we done for the downtown economy? How much development has this not necessarily created all on its own, but instigated? And again, our planner worked with some very influential developers in the area to kind of gain access to landowners and apartment owners, and to really get a feel for how much growth has gone on in this area. You can see the study area is about a quarter mile surrounding the streetcar route. The key was forming these partnerships with the developers in order to gain data. Again, this is it's not necessarily a scientific or perfectly academic study, but again, we were able to talk and touch every single property owner in this quarter mile. So we got wonderful feedback, and so we feel very confident in the numbers that we've got. This map illustrates the growth since 2000 in the study area, and it shows, again, you can't really see the scale. The red is investments over $10 million, which, again, one thing I learned moving from Texas to Little Rock is that it's much different scale in Arkansas. $10 million is a significant investment, and some of these are major public improvements. We've got an arena that went on the north side of the river, a minor league baseball park, the Clinton Library is located on the east side of Little Rock, and then numerous residential and commercial centers have come up around the streetcar line. You can see just some examples of the growth in North Little Rock. Again, the historic Argenta area in North Little Rock was, I think blighted is too strong of a word, but it was definitely depressed. And so I think, again, while the streetcar didn't do it all on its own, because we did have some very progressive developers and leaders in the area, definitely the development has centered around the streetcar route. So you can just see different examples of different types of uses that we've seen in North Little Rock. Little Rock, very similar. Most of the projects there on a bit larger scale. Obviously, the population of Little Rock is a little bit bigger. The downtown area is a little bit larger, and so the growth there has been a bit more rapid than on the north side of the river. But River Rail has definitely spurred development there. Kind of the nuts and bolts of the numbers. We found that about 13,000 jobs were either created or sustained because of the streetcar. To me, again, coming from the outside, talking about sort of the scale of the area, it was very impressive to me to see that the population growth within this quarter mile is 21%. Arkansas is not a growing state necessarily. I think the entire region is growing at less than 1%. As soon as you're 5 minutes outside the city, you're in very rural areas, and so to see 21%, we're really the project, the momentum that's being gained by the River Rail is really centering, creating more sustainable neighborhoods, walkable streets. I mean, it's really starting a movement in our area. In an area, again, like I said earlier, it's not really known for having very, high quality transit services. 1,100 residences within the study area, 56% increase in property value, major investments of about $913 million within the study area. And again, these numbers will be available later on. I think the key is, okay, here's the money slide for our folks to show them just how much bang for the buck that they received. River Rail, local taxpayers. So folks in Little Rock, North Little Rock, and within Pulaski County paid $6 million for this rail project, and they've received almost $1 billion back in investment, and that's growing. We showed some of the pictures you saw were still developments that are underway, and so there's still developments that are coming. But to date, almost $1 billion for Little Rock, North Little Rock, and Pulaski County. That is a considerable amount of investment. So, for every dollar that's put in, we've got $151 coming back. And again, the transit and the streetcar is clearly not the only generator of these things. But again, we've developed relationships with these developers, and they said they would be putting their money, more likely putting their money in other areas if the streetcar wasn't there, just because it's a big piece of the dynamic that's changing in our area. And so really we're working to capitalize upon this return on investment. Metro Plan, our regional MPO is looking at, or has looked at some, at a very high level, some other extensions for River Rail. Really what we need to do is get River Rail into some of the more residential areas. Again, residences are popping up at a rapid rate around River Rail, but really need to expand out to some of the historical neighborhoods of North Little Rock and Little Rock. I think once we do that, we'll really have the traction we need to just continue growing the system, continue growing Central Arkansas transit. And the key for us will be dedicated funding. Right now, we go from city to city each year asking for money. I think once they see that a booming River Rail project, expanded bus service, that will actually be able to accomplish that goal one of these days. Unfortunately, I have to catch a flight, so Larry's going to have to handle all the very difficult questions that Marcia was encouraging you. And I won't be able to answer them anyways. I've only been there for 3 months. So, thank you.
Okay. Go to our last and final one. There we go. Go away. All yours.
Okay.
Go for it, Larry.
Well, thank you, Marcia. Yeah, Larry Hopper with Oklahoma City. As you can kind of see, there are just a lot of exciting projects happening in Mid-America, and Oklahoma City is really no different in that regard. So, Oklahoma City, just to give you a sense, this is a city of about a little over 500,000 people in a metropolitan area of about 1.2 million people. And, what he said about Little Rock was interesting. Actually, almost 20 years ago, 1993, our voters approved funds for a rail transit option, but it was eventually the one early maps project that wasn't built, and that obviously is a project that came back for consideration later. Sometimes there's sort of a long timeline on making projects happen, but Oklahoma City is definitely an interesting place to be these days, and really has been for quite some time. And we're a city that's kind of playing catch up. Like in the slide on the left, you see the Capitol with the dome. Well, the building was built in 1917. The dome was added, maybe about 5 or 10 years ago. Okay, there's a lot of practicality and pragmatic thinking in Oklahoma, and basically the choice was, well, do we have a state-run hospital for people at about 1915, or a dome on our Capitol? And the choice was, let's look after our people. And it just sort of took us a while, and then I guess we stopped noticing that we didn't have a dome. And yet, these are symbols that most states would take for granted, So, and in addition, the great design, that's a fantastic thing. And, the picture at the far right is the Devon Tower, which for a while was going to be the 5th tallest building west of the Mississippi. Now it's just kind of in the top handful, okay? But Devon Energy Tower is a great place. Well, you know, I really am glad that Thomas was able to kind of put to rest this business about flyover country, you know, because that certainly wasn't the title that, you know, that I was suggesting, but I can understand why it's good. Really, it's kind of about how a lot of us sort of have played catch up, and how, regardless of the part of the country that you're in, you can do that, and your formula, you know, to success, it's gonna vary, you know. These are all three about transformative rail projects, you know, that are right for the context that they are in. So, you know, I'm going to talk about a few things here, as you can kind of see, a little bit about. I'm going to probably focus more on the earlier slides and not talk so much about some of the kind of technical work that we've done with a recent Tiger II planning grant. But along these lines, back in 2010, Oklahoma City actually did apply for a HUD Community Challenge grant that was received. That one has been used primarily to improve on the comprehensive planning process, updating the comprehensive plan, and doing some studies that really we probably wouldn't have funded otherwise. And these specialty studies are really, they're catalytic and they're helpful. And, you know, the planning department applied separate from us, as we applied for a Tiger II planning grant related to transit. But still, you know, we've both worked together on a number of fronts, you know, since that time. We were working together before, but, you know, we found ways to work with each other. Okay, well, you know, Oklahoma City taking an unconventional step, and I talked about the Capitol Dome and pragmatism, and about how, you know, you got to do something that fits the local political and societal and financial situation. And in our case, you have to realize that in Oklahoma City, we're a relatively small transit system. You know, on the scale of things, we're a lot closer to Little Rock than we are to Kansas City. And what that means is that, you know, our total number of trips on our transit system per day, if you add up paratransit, fixed route, all that, is going to be basically, you know, well, at an annual basis, maybe 4 million trips a year, okay? 4 million trips a year. I mean, you know, that's not much compared to a lot of major cities. And in our case, there's really no Sunday service outside of the downtown circulator, really, and a little bit of a special van service we run. Buses are pretty much off the street by 7 or 8 at night. This is probably kind of how it is in Little Rock as well. Kansas City, you know, we admire Kansas City, okay? They have, you know, probably 5 times the amount of bus service. So part of it is about starting somewhere, okay? So for us, it was actually going to be better not to sort of wait on the panacea of finally getting a half penny or a full penny sales tax. The idea was, let's get started. And the idea is that instead of, you know, streetcar being sort of that last mile, you know, I shouldn't call it a last mile luxury, but instead of that sort of being a last mile to try to transport people who've gotten off of trains or buses at some major, and getting them to that final destination. In our case, it's really a transformative kind of first step towards a lot better transit, and really a step towards fantastic livability for a pretty large geographic area, you know, let's say a couple of square miles. So you know, that gives you a little sense of it, you know, and in our case, our voters, you know, they, well, remember this guy, Will Rogers? Let's talk about him. He's, you know, he had it right. You know, he wasn't at the first revolution, but it's like he said, even if you're on the right track, you're going to get ran over if you just sit there long enough, okay? We've all got to kind of seize the moment, kind of keep moving. We're all sort of regions in competition with each other, that's for sure. And so sometimes, you know, the decisions aren't easy, but it's like you said, you know, you got to go out on the limb because that's where the fruit is, okay? So so innovation is kind of what that's about. And as you can kind of see, you know, we were really the innovator in early day parking demand management, the parking meter, you know, an Oklahoma idea invented in Oklahoma, you know, and the shopping cart. You know, we won't talk about all the sociological implications, but what a, but you know, second to the other four-wheel vehicle, the automobile, has really had a dramatic impact on society. And you know, when we were all at that reception on Sunday night, the Innovation Center, I saw this passage that showed a guy named Paul Tutko as being a guy who was toying around with adding electricity to guitars back in 1930. Well, in Oklahoma City, we had an African-American fellow by the name of Charlie Christian, who's kind of credited with being either the inventor of the electric guitar, maybe not, but was definitely one of those early pioneers in terms of that, and he was really a great jazz musician of the 1930s. So you know, innovation happens in Oklahoma City just like in Seattle, but it also, you know, you have examples in your own communities too. So, livability, I think it was already sort of talked about, a lot of definitions. I like this one that basically says that livability is best defined locally, even though we have definitely subscribed to the 6 principles that the Livability Partnership has. If you want to see a good web page definition about it and some exploration of the topic, try that. Okay, so meaning in flyover country. Well, livability is sort of the old quality of life concept revisited, is kind of one way to put it. In our case, things started early, like things like the Bricktown revitalization were sort of a step towards livability, walkability. Project 180 is trying to transform about 180 acres of downtown and make it turn 180 degrees in terms of pedestrian walkability, narrowing down of streets, creating a much more pleasant and ADA accessible walking environment. And then those 3 MAPS votes, the 1993 MAPS votes, the MAPS for Kids, and what these are pay-as-you-go tax initiatives, where basically you set out to the voters what it is that you think, what you've learned from them and what you think is going to really move the community forward. And so a whole series of quality of life type of improvements, livability improvements, came out of these tax initiatives. And basically the thing for MAPS for Kids was a municipal tax that in essence was put towards revitalizing the physical plan of schools. And so so in the MAPS 3 one, just approved in 2009, was about $800 million for 7 or 8 projects, one of which was this idea of streetcar being a first transformative step. So, we're also a community that's recognized the public health issues in our community and the need for all of us to drop a few pounds. Also, what kind of happened based on surveys is we realized that people were no longer seeing transit as a 4-letter word. There was a lot of support for trying to improve the bus system. They didn't quite know how. And so, Portland envy and Portland fatigue. For me, I have Portland envy, but, my wife, she's tired of me talking about Portland, so she's got the fatigue, okay? And the thing is that at least in Oklahoma City, though, maybe unlike your communities, we actually have a street that's 7 or 8 miles long called Portland Avenue. So, in the early days, so we were destined to kind of say, Portland may be that city with the growth restrictions and all that, but maybe there's something about this place that is applicable here. And for us, a recent livability news flash, we don't have commuter rail, we don't have a dedicated fund to build that, but we do have the ability now to buy and control the real estate and the depot that will be the eventual commuter hub. So, and it may very well emerge. Oh, a little bit of timeline stuff, that about 2006 we did our regional systems fixed guideway study. Jacobs Engineering helped us on that. In fact, we've got one of the project managers in the room for that. About 2008, we began an alternatives analysis for downtown circulator, because coming out of that plan for the region, the idea of commuter rail, bus rapid transit, a downtown circulator, a hub, what made the most sense was to try to take the streetcar step first, because we could probably find a way to find enough operating revenue to operate a downtown streetcar. We probably weren't going to be able to find $50 or $60 million a year to continually operate better bus service. And again, we focus on streetcar, transform the inner part of the city. The AA moved kind of slowly, but in 2009 was that MAPS 3 vote for downtown streetcar and numerous other types of livability initiatives. And in 2010, we really got underway more seriously and heavily with public involvement in the AA. 2011, COTPA, the transit agency, selected the locally preferred alternative. $200 million, 7.6 track mile route went through City Council, was adopted into the region's long-range transportation plan. And then in 2012, as we were, starting in the Tiger 2 planning, which was supposed to be the next step, that's when we learned from the federal government that, your ridership just doesn't look like it'll project high enough. So, basically, we then realized that we were going to have to go with this first phase of streetcar on our own. So we basically, with public involvement, with the help of the MAPS Transit Subcommittee, a group of citizens appointed by the mayor and council, we focused in on what was in essence a subpart of this route. You see sort of a backwards shaped Z here, and you also see sort of a stair step towards the left to the right. That backwards shaped Z seemed to be the main focus. Well, in 2013, thanks to that subcommittee, a lot of additional detailed study work, planning and engineering and public involvement, a new route has been selected. Well, you know, our Tiger II planning grant had about 7 different elements to it. You know, both, you know, the economic assessment on the one hand, we can really grow if we do this, but also the health impact assessment. You know, Oklahoma has, and it's too bad that Jared's not here, Oklahoma, Arkansas, various southern states have relatively poor health outcomes in terms of diabetes and lung cancer and any number of things. And yet, streetcar and transit, transit can have a real positive relationship and benefit to health. And so, in our case, part of the Tiger II planning grant was to do the first health impact assessment in Oklahoma. So if any of you are planners and you were reading the planning magazine this weekend, the most recent one, it's got a map of, of states where health impact assessments are done. And, this business about flyover country, they just flew right over us and left us out, okay? But actually, we do have one now, and it relates to this transit project. And it's important to focus not just on the economics, but really on that very, very human side of livability, one aspect being a health impact assessment. Well, this set of milestones gives you a sense of the types of tasks that we put into our Tiger II planning grant to sort of refine the planning for it and to sort of position ourselves for what to do, not just kind of, as we adopt this, as we work on this first phase, but how to kind of position ourselves for the future. What do we do as we're trying to open up the line and get just past that? So the, working with public agencies and the like, there's a lot of different groups that obviously you all need to work with. In any planning process, despite maybe 100+ meetings, there's always latecomers, who come and really don't feel like they were really engaged or had a chance, and so there's a continual re-education and education of newcomers about what's came before them. And in our case, Oklahoma City is a relatively conservative community, and on September 24th, we did have a vote to approve the recommended route framework. And it was a split vote, but it was a very, very civil vote. And actually, here at Revolution, one of our council members, who is, I think you might say, had a healthy skepticism about the streetcar project as proposed, well, he's been to Revolution twice, so we know he's been a great transit supporter, and we also realize that really, I think in many respects he appears to really support streetcar. There's just ways that he would like to make sure that our community works on some equity issues and affordable housing issues, and so he came to learn, So there's good. Public and agency participation, these are just a sense of the types of meetings that we've had in 2013 alone, as we've tried to keep the community engaged, give them every chance as we refine that planning since the 2011 LPA. So streetcar evaluation process really quickly. Coming out of the summer 2011, you had this route. In the region's long-range plan, we, with the Tiger II planning grant, were able to take a fresh eyes approach, not just the folks who are on the steering committee for that alternatives analysis, but a number of other people. 8 potential route options come out of it, and you evaluate it according to certain metrics, and you wind up with 4 potential route options. A little bit of difference, considerable with a lot of them. Selection, and what you wind up with is those 4 options. I'm only going to give you 2, the 2 that are probably the most divergent. One we called the hybrid route, and it really served the greater downtown pretty well. And I would have you focus on just the red solid lines, not the dashed lines. All the dashed lines are potential phase 2 extensions or future extensions. Because in our case, there's about $100 million of the $120 million that the voters approved. About $100 million would be dedicated towards this first phase. The other $25 million is something that we can kind of keep in reserve for a potential expansion. Something called the Zeta route, it's sort of a backward shaped Z, if you sort of focus on that red solid line. That's really the one that council has selected. And it's interesting because really it serves a few different kinds of markets, not just the transit center where people get on and off buses today, and on that it's an inbound trip from the transit center to the heart of downtown for the bulk of workers then. But it also, on the outlying areas, for areas that are maybe for housing, it gives them a nice direct shot towards employment. And a number of hotels that are now under construction in the Bricktown area, they have a pretty direct ride to a convention center, which is also part of that MAPS package. And it's sort of at the southwest, where that kind of green dot is in the middle, the lower middle of the route. So that was approved then. There's a little bit of refinement that we'll do in the very northern part, that upper left part. That route is pretty well set, but there's some options about whether to single track instead of double tracking on that north-south stretch. And then the upper right and the lower left, stars, those are really not to be funded in this phase one, but that's kind of what that $20 million, $25 million could be applied towards, is one, sort of a little bit of one or the other, okay? That's a simple way to put it. Okay, challenges and opportunities. I really am glad Jared gave me a couple of minutes here. You know, these projects, they don't just happen just because of the transit agency or just because of the city or just because of the MPO. Sort of all of them play a role. You know, COTPA, the transit authority, we might have led the way through all that, trying to do a systems plan for the region and the alternatives analysis for a downtown circulator and a lot of other things. But you know, when the citizens voted on this, that was really a municipal sales tax, and we don't really have engineers on staff, and we're great at building garages and a number of projects, but you know, for this type of public works type project, you really need to rely upon a department like a public works department that does that. The MAPS department is sort of a special public works department, and so you know, they obviously play a great role in this, and as staffs we meet every other week, and these are city sales tax dollars. They're not just they're not really the transit authorities. The MPO, obviously important because of the whole matter of making sure that your regional travel model and is up to snuff, and that you know the way that future growth of housing and jobs are in there properly, and so they become an important group. And here you see in this little third bullet, you know, we are Metro Transit today, but actually recently our board has made the decision that we're going to rebrand and become an organization called Embark. Okay, so if you've been confusing us with Seattle, you won't confuse us anymore with Seattle Metro Transit, but you know, Embark, you know, forward together. We're really kind of doing a number of things that are sort of a new start, building on some recent successes and a foundation for some great growth. So, you know, other challenges are just the public grasp of streetcar. A lot of people think it might be light rail. Some people probably envision the vintage type cars. Ours are going to be the low floor modern type. It's a very kind of a different way that it works. Some challenges that came through in the panel yesterday is that a lot of cities seem to be kind of struggling with, well, how do we sort of hardwire in more affordable housing into the growth that we're trying to attract and build around streetcar? And you know, we can talk about that strategy. And also, you know, we in a lot of communities, you know, we know how we are going to find the operating funds for this system, but you know, it's very likely that there'll be a natural discussion about, well, are there other ways to supplement that? And the opportunities, well, you know, there's several, but maybe the two to kind of focus on is that, you know, maybe it's not just about streetcar, you know. It really is about how rail and bus interface. And so it could well be that in our case, what helps build the case for streetcar extensions, or maybe more properly, just more livability, is bus that is really kind of built that complements a streetcar. And so maybe that's a concept, and it seems to be filtering up through, you know, some of the Tiger II planning, is that maybe at the end of the line of streetcar, you basically have buses the feeder buses that come and meet streetcar with a time transfer. And so every time they come together, or every other time streetcar gets into the line, there's a bus there. In other words, frequent bus service for a focused area of the city where there's a lot of employment. And that's one of those types of strategies worth further evaluation, because lots of people would think that the next natural phase is you got some streetcar, build more, but you know, it's definitely a very, you know, it's many times more expensive to build the streetcar, and sometimes you really need the rubber tire service to help show and prove the case for more rail. The bottom right deal is, you know, this idea of positioning, but this time not for a $75 million small starts grant, but maybe a smaller amount, you know, a smaller amount that would actually maybe rate better on the cost effectiveness scores, especially considering the way that federal policy has changed. So, you know, I think the rest of the slides get kind of technical. I'm not going to really get into very much of that. We've had a really good economic development and land use assessment done, and so there's a lot of projects underway that'll be in the ground in this next year or so that are around streetcars. You see on the graph on the left. On the right is this idea of, you know, if you're looking for opportunity parcels around transit, part of what you're looking for are places where the ratio of the building improvements to the value of the land isn't that high, you know? I mean, if a building has pretty high value, it's less likely to be one that's allowed to be sold and redeveloped. You know, there's got to be open land as well as buildings that are affordable enough to build or renovate or build into the back of. But in our case, you know, probably half of these homes, these dwellings that'll be in place by 2017, a lot of those are actually in the pipeline right now. You know, perhaps as many as half are sort of under construction or in the pipeline. But the growth over that next 10 years would be a pretty tremendous growth in a city like ours. 5,000 units within a couple of blocks of streetcar, when today, you know, we've got, you know, just a couple of thousand. And then the commercial square footage, pretty tremendous growth anticipated for, you know, for regions like ours. So, you know, ridership projections, the main takeaway is that, you know, ridership science, you know, for making projections for these circulators is not, they can't model a lot of the logical, it appears, the logical and rather obvious factors that will certainly drive ridership someday, especially in a city like ours where there's not a lot of transit, okay? And so the ridership models are important and necessary, but more off-model tools seem to be needed. Livability assessment, well, you see the 6 principles that Dwayne had referred to earlier, and we actually have done a livability analysis as part of the Tiger II planning, and it was the way that we evaluated some of the top proposals. They all really wound up scoring about the same, and you know, so we looked at things like promoting equitable and affordable housing, you know, looking at kind of where we had housing today. We looked at you know, enhancing economic competitiveness, and this little blue buffer is sort of an area that almost all the different route options fit inside of. And the health impact assessment, I'll just kind of touch on that. You know, there were 4 factors that were really looked at in more of a quantitative way, and I'll finish up here in just a couple of minutes. But there were also all these other benefits that were, you know, likely to happen, but we didn't try to measure directly. Everything from, you know, using streetcar as an incentive to attract a grocer someday and sort of end what really exists today as a food desert. More people riding transit mean more people walking around at a lot of different hours, so you got more safety on the street, more eyes on the street. We have a safe downtown as it is, but I'm sure that, you know, there are some people who they feel more secure when there's even more folks around. You know, you're going to pay. We already pay a lot of attention to pedestrian crossings and the like. We can do even more with improvements that would happen in and around streetcar stops. The you know, the idea that streetcar is a way to, for some folks, you know, make it to where they can actually live in an area where they need 1 car instead of 2, or no cars because of car sharing, all these things. So we looked at a number of factors. These are just sort of the maps of some of the factors we looked at in terms of minority population and poverty, 0-car households, even health providers that were in and around the line. And I've already talked a little bit about the phasing. You know, $100 million about for phase 1, another 20 or so that held in reserve for a potential phase 2. So next steps, well, we got to finish that the Tiger II planning work, and we are going to be doing enough preliminary engineering to begin with the order of rail, and we also have to buy a car, you know, buy cars for this facility, and obviously work on some of these issues about housing and how best to really get the maximum development in and adjacent to those lines, and provide some focus on affordable housing issues and the like as well. You know, for us, streetcar is seen as a way to maybe eventually get us to some type of more support for that dedicated perpetual tax, like a lot of folks would have here. So, you know, there are some additional next steps. Maybe one of the big ones is, again, how you got to start somewhere. So you start with trying to make the core area, the downtown, more livable, so that as you look at things like bus rapid transit away from downtown or commuter rail, these projects can potentially just extend from streetcar. So, you know, again, you know, these types of livability projects are not necessarily about what you are today, what your community, what you want it to be, you know, what you want it to be for your children and for your grandchildren. So that gives you a little perspective on Oklahoma City.
Thank you, Larry. And given his Portland's envy, we'll keep the Portland streetcar up on this screen while we have your questions and answers. I'm going to challenge you. Ask your questions, the tough ones, please, and I'll ask the panel to ask each other questions if they want to. Let's start over here.
Hi, my name is Emily. I have a question for Thomas. I grew up, I love the Midwest. I love the Midwest. It's so much more than a flyover
Midwest.
region in this country. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I went to college in Iowa before I moved out to Seattle.
There you go.
One thing about Omaha is people adore their cars, and they refuse to take transit. It is not, it's not something that is an option, really. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on if you've seen a shift in attitude. I know that my parents, there was a bike lane that was installed near my parents' house a year ago, and people came out and protested it. It was bad, and the city took it away. So I'm just wondering if you've seen any changes in attitudes, and if not, what you're doing to address it, because I think it's really important. So
Yeah, it's a great question, and we make it very easy to drive. I mean, parking's cheap, we've got more capacity than we need in most places, and we are in fact still building capacities. And so, so your point is well taken. I think it's one of the reasons why it's obvious to come back downtown, because there's so many things that are happening there that we can build on. There's so much energy. There's so many supportive policies that are already being put in place. And so it's ripe for this sort of transformation. And again, from a regional perspective, we think the successes that are demonstrated downtown will kind of seep into our adjacent communities. And I would say that we are seeing a shift in mentality. Many of our cities are approaching public works investments differently than they have historically. So they're looking at replacements or overlays as opportunities to incorporate bike lanes and address pedestrian barriers. We've got a lot more work to do there. Clearly, access to transit's a big challenge in some of our suburban corridors, and our Dick could speak to that from the HCA here. But we are seeing communities that are more sensitive to that, and part of that is the engagement in what they're hearing from their citizens. I think part of it's that we are working regionally to try to ensure that federal funds and regional resources that those issues are top of mind when we're making investments, that we're not losing opportunities to make improvements. So we've got a lot more work to do, but we are seeing a shift in mentality, I would say, from many of the local cities.
Next question in the back.
Hi, my name's Shannon. Oh, that's loud. I'm with a nonprofit in Charlotte, North Carolina called Sustain Charlotte, but I am a native Midwesterner. I'm from Iowa, and I have cousins in both Oklahoma City and Kansas City. So I really enjoyed all the presentations. And my organization has just started an alliance to advocate for public investment in our transit plan. And our biggest hurdle over this past year has been getting public support for the streetcar, for phasing, or rather to fund all of phase 2, which is really the first phase. And I'm just curious if you have any lessons you can share with me about how to get the public to grasp the benefits and the reason for streetcars. Like Kansas City, Charlotte grew up around a very extensive streetcar network. And so in the public's mind in Charlotte, they associate the streetcar with, trolleys from the 1910s and think it's a reversion and going back and rather than forward. So any thoughts on how you've been able to bring your public along, or were you able to, did you just leapfrog them with progressive elected officials?
Well, maybe we can share different perspectives. In Kansas City, one of the things that was done that was unique, in large part because of, I think, the vision of one of the council members that I mentioned, but we had really years of failed attempts to advance citywide initiatives. And we're a sprawling city, we're a sprawling region, and trying to develop a proposal that's rail-based, that serves all areas of our community and would be supported through a public citywide election, continued to prove problematic. And so what was done in downtown was a district-based financing mechanism was used that allowed the city to focus on where has there historically been support for these investments, and focus there. And so the district was really built, one, based on where we thought the opportunity for near-term for a near-term, short-term circulator would be, but also where has the parts of the region and parts of the city specifically been that have historically supported this concept? And I will say that the city did a great job of working not just with downtown residents to build a coalition to help advocate and educate folks, but they also did what they needed to engage the business community who would be paying a part of the bill through a sales tax and property tax assessment to understand what the value proposition of this investment would be long term. And there was some compromise and negotiation, but ultimately the business community was at the table, involved in part of the governance conversations, and advocated and helped support the council in making some tough decisions about how this would ultimately be financed. So it was really building a case that around a constituency who was amenable at the end of the day.
Larry?
Yeah, I would agree. It's, it's kind of about this idea of getting both the grassroots support and the grass top support. And, the business community in Oklahoma City, there are those who are probably pretty excited about the prospect of light rail, but not necessarily understanding or really that desirous of the bus. And yet there were 3 different citizen coalitions that I can think of that all were engaged in transit. 2 of them very much about rail, one about both rubber tire and rail. It helps to get that 501c3. That's really a key step in trying to get credibility for your organization, because it just speaks volumes. And, one of our groups that does that was actually held meetings back before the MAPS election to try to get, input back in 2009 about what do people really want, and tried to do it without trying to show an agenda at that time. They just knew that somehow transit needed to be in that initiative. Other groups were just very focused on it's got to be streetcar. So, and sometimes I think it helps to have multiple voices, multiple types of coalitions, because that just kind of shows that there's a lot of different support. But the downtown, the folks that can really benefit downtown, downtown associations, even the downtown chamber and the like, you have to foster their support and interest as well. I mean, somebody has to pay for the polling, and that becomes, I think, a critical step in any type of a coalition's existence. Is can it afford to do the type of political polling and research it takes to make the case to leaders that, hey, if you try this, it may pass? Because a lot of leaders aren't so much tax averse. That's kind of a dangerous thing to say. I mean, some folks really, they might present a tax proposal, but they want the sense it'll pass. They definitely don't want to be the elected officials who pushed for a tax increase that failed. I mean, this probably is controversial in Kansas City.
Okay. Next question. What's up here, right here?
I'd be curious, have you been able to identify any lessons you applied from other people's mistakes?
That's a good question.
Well, we made a lot of them over the years, and so we had plenty to pull from just within our own recent history. And so honestly, I mean, I think our evolution was around our approach was based on the fact that we had 30 years of false starts trying to get this done, and that's not to blame anybody. It's just to say that those were challenges, and they were a combination of political and strategic. And so this initiative was really intentionally crafted in large part on those lessons learned. Clearly, we've looked around at other communities and what they've done well, and the case for economic development. It was clear from our electeds and from our public that this was about more than transportation. It was about building a community that could be competitive and livable and vibrant. And transit was a catalyst to help do that. And so it was really kind of building on that vision, but it was based on a lot of what we had learned over the years, frankly, through trial and error.
Yeah, and I think for us, a lot of it's probably for us being about things like the design of the system, even things like how your maintenance facility should be, the type of car to buy, what to do about the on wire, off wire. There's a rich experience around the country that we can draw on.
And Dwayne, I think how did you try and help these systems understand some of the problems of the past, correct?
Well, I mean, there's a really vital peer exchange that happens within our grantee community. And so I also think even at this conference, we're seeing this notion penetrate into more mid-sized and metro regions. And so the lesson base is really growing quickly.
Yeah, great. Next question.
I work for a transportation planning agency, and we're familiar with getting grants for transportation planning. And I see some of our other agencies, or cities or county, getting grants for land use planning. And so we've been trying to do a little more of the combined planning, but it's still a bit disjointed. But I was thinking, as Dwayne was talking about the regional planning grants, have you seen where maybe transportation planning grants have come together with some of your regional planning grants to do, a better effort that combines, not just the transportation, but combines everything, the transportation and land use planning together?
No, I think across the board, the challenge grants are community corridor-based grants, so they have to deal with it on the scale of where they're trying to make their developments. They usually are 3 to 5 year plans that they're trying to put into place. Some of them are longer. But the regional planning grants, by requirement, they have to look at land use, they have to look at transportation, they're looking at economic development, and they have to bring those partners together in a consortia to hash those things out for the long-term vision. And so what's been really exciting is places where those conversations weren't as robust before, the governance structure is actually built and the working groups are built to thread those together. And so now for the grantees who are finishing up, they're asking the question, well, this is great for 3 years and we came up with a nice product, but how do we keep this conversation going so we actually put some of these things into place? And that's really the working question on the table for the folks as they graduate.
Yeah,
So yes, that's it.
And I would add, we've gone beyond our HUD grant to think about how do we deploy this program longer term in a more holistic sort of way. And we actually applied to ourselves through our own competitive process and developed what we called a Planning Sustainable Places program. We took a set aside of a small amount of surface transportation planning funds to fund a regional competitive program that communities could apply to for planning funds to do exactly this issue of looking at how do we connect transportation and land use explicitly and more aggressively, and to help them build concepts that then could advance and come back through the process for actual construction dollars to help build. And so we're actually in the first round of that. We leveraged some HUD funds with $1 million of regional surface transportation funds. So we had $1.5 million for the first program. We set it up as a pilot because we weren't sure how the communities would respond to the opportunity. And we received 37 applications from cities and counties around and we funded 18 of those. We've now funded a second round of that program for $1 million that will be launched in late 2014, and likely will continue to be building on that as we learn more about what's working and what's not, and as we become more experienced with this issue of real TOD around things like the streetcar line and other efforts. So we are not relying long-term. The HUD opportunity was great to get us jump-started, but there are resources within regions that are eligible to be used for things like planning and TOD, and so I would encourage you. There's some other great models, Atlanta and CMAP in Chicago, who are doing some great things with these sorts of regional programs.
We also have a responsibility at the federal level to make those kind of connections a little bit more fluid. And so one success we've had is when we did our grant reviews, we actually had agency reps from other agencies help with the review, and it opened some eyes about what we were trying to do with the plans. And so in particular, EDA from Commerce, after the review process, said to us, a lot of the things that you're asking for in this look like the CEDS plans, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy plans that we require of the communities. We should talk. And we said, well, yeah, we should talk. And so we talked. And then, about 6 months later, which was relatively quick for two federal agencies to get together, they were able to announce that if people had certain elements in their regional plans, it could count as their CEDS plan. And so, that's, one federal planning requirement down, 17 to go, right? But I mean, it's starting to actually promote the alignment and have local folks thinking, okay, instead of thinking, why do we jump through so many hoops, thinking if we can make a comprehensive and cogent plan, it can have multiple audiences and uses. So that's a goal we have as we keep moving forward.
All right, folks, we are out of time now. The gentlemen have said they'd be willing to stick around for a little while if you have more questions. I want to thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful to those of you that are really trying, not so large cities, to try and do what the other cities have done. Thanks for your time, and thank our panel, please.